Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, by all means.
So, did everybody get one of these leaflets? Because on the back there are two images of moose hair embroidered works from the Wendat community. Would anybody like to? I'm going to refer to them in case you've got them. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome. And I would like to thank Simon for inviting me to speak today. And I'd also like to thank his team for organizing this wonderful symposium. And it gives a wonderful opportunity to talk about Aboriginal perspectives of creativity that go beyond Western understandings of art and craft. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to talk about how Wendat creative work contains elements of those Western understandings of art and craft and then goes beyond them to art understood in a holistic Indigenous sense. So this is art that's grounded in an Indigenous worldview. And in this worldview, it would be found in all aspects and essential to all aspects of life, whether it's everyday life, family, community, diplomatic, spiritual, and commercial use. So the work of the Wendat artist demonstrates, this is both historical work and contemporary work, demonstrates the use of moose hair embroidery in all these different spheres. So one of the things about all these objects from all these spheres is that they demonstrate meanings based in connections with the land and in continuity of Wendat identity. So I think that to get a closer understanding of the holistic meanings of Wendat objects, both these concepts, art and craft, are needed. And then in addition, the Wendat objects that contain meanings connected to the materials themselves, the animal hides, the moose hair, and the vegetable dyes that come from plants. They are connected to Indigenous understandings of life and what is considered alive. And they contain meanings that are connected to the process of creation themselves, very much like what Jamie was talking about in her discussion. So to talk about these objects, I want to look at two Indigenous Wendat works. And the first one I'm going to talk about is this pouch here in the top. First of all, did anybody know who the Wendat or Huron Nation, where they're from? They're originally from, their ancestral lands are in Huronia, which is in Ontario, just to the east of Georgian Bay. And then there was a dispersal and migration, and their community is now just outside Quebec City. But they continue to have close connections to both these regions. So the Western concept of art, as I'm going to talk about this, in its broadest terms, is an object that contains transcendent or spiritual meanings. It's an object that is created within established aesthetic traditions. And it's an object that usually is not made for use. It's usually made simply to be looked at. So in this example of the Wendat tobacco pouch, I'm going to talk about how it contains some of these Western meanings, and then it contains meanings based in Indigenous concepts and values. So the pouch is worked with zigzag and hourglass motifs, and the colors that you see here are faded. But when this was new, this would have been a jet black and a brilliant scarlet red and a glossy white. And so these colors had symbolic meanings that were based in spiritual beliefs. So the white would express knowledge, life, well-being, and harmony. The red also expressed life, but also it was the more emotive and animate aspects of life. And the black expressed an absence of life. It could mean meaning, or it could have other meanings it could mean mourning or other meanings dependent on the context. So then, in addition to the spiritual meanings from the color, the motifs as well. So in this, it's got motifs on both sides, but one of the main ones is an hourglass motif, which is thought to be associated with the thunderbird or the Manitou or spirit of the upper world. So the pouch is connected to spiritual meanings not only through its colors and its materials and the motifs, but also through its use. So this was a tobacco pouch, and it was used to carry tobacco, so it's a sacred plant. And then, as it is now, it was used both as a gift, it was used in ceremony, and also it's thought that when it was smoked, it would make a connection between the person and the spirit world. So reflecting that other understanding of Western art, this comes from a long-established aesthetic tradition. There are a number of these works in museums in Europe. This work actually dates from the late 18th century, and it's in the British Museum. And all these works follow established conventions, but each one is different, and each artist put in their own individual understanding and interpretation of the meanings and the motifs. So in this way, the pouch, like other Wendat objects, is understood within Western concepts of art, but it goes beyond that through values based in spiritual ceremony and also seen as an essential, useful part of life. So the other thing I want to talk about is craft. And this is a Western concept, but the concept of craft that I'll talk about is, say, an older traditional Western sense, and that is mastery of knowledge and skills and technique that are extremely difficult to acquire. So this would be a concept of craft that might go back to the European guilds, where you had to work for maybe 10 to 15 years before you were considered master of your craft. So with that mastery, you had complete control of your materials, and because with that control, you could express the aesthetic designs and the conventions that were part of the tradition. So the technical virtuosity and control of materials required for moussehair embroidery, this took years and years to master the technique. And with that mastery comes the spiritual content and the design aesthetic. So it brings together those two concepts. Now to show you another example, this is a birch bark moussehair embroidered tray. And this is one of a pair of trays that was given to Lord and Lady Elgin, or received by Lord and Lady Elgin in around 1852. And these trays are now at the Museum of Civilization. This is exquisitely embroidered in minute detail, and this is done, the first one was done with a weaving technique. This one is actually done by sewing or embroidering the moussehair, and that's really difficult. So each moussehair is about 10 centimeters long, and it was threaded through a needle, and then maybe 2 stitches could be made with each piece of moussehair, and then you'd have to get another piece and rethread it. So this took huge patience, and it took real manual dexterity. I actually went to an atelier at the Musée Huron-Wendat where they were giving lessons in moussehair embroidery, and it's very, very difficult indeed. And I can see you would need to be learning from when you're a young child and then keep on learning for the rest of your life. This work, if anybody ever wants to see it at the museum, it's like a tour de force. It's a virtuosity of that ability. So that was the technique. So it's years of practice. And then it has the art aspect. It's the harmonious arrangement of elements, the use of line and form, and then the motifs on the tray give them their spiritual meaning. This is really small, but actually it's embroidered with strawberries. And strawberries in Wendat belief connect to beliefs in the afterworld, and strawberry juice itself is a really essential part of ceremonies. So these trays were made to be used. They had a functional purpose. They were made as card trays. And then also they played an important role in diplomatic ceremonies. So these were received by Lord Elgin in the context of his diplomatic meetings with the then chief of the Wendat community or nation, Chief François-Xavier Taranché. So these works then combine both the Western concept of art and craft, but then they go beyond that in their meanings, diplomatic traditions, and they're made for use, an important use. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the holistic understanding of creative work. They go beyond Western art and craft in their understandings of what's animate, what's alive. So in the hide work that was used for making moccasins, moussehair embroidered moccasins and pouches, the traditional way of tanning used the animal's brain to tan the hide. And the understanding is that the life and spirit of the animal was then returned to the hide. So when the moccasins or pouches were made, they actually did become animate objects. Then there's other understandings going beyond craft and art is in the meanings of the materials themselves. So the moose hair, the moose hide, the dyes that came from plant roots, and the moose hair itself have meanings and significance based in Indigenous teaching and values. And then the last part of it is the creative process. And this goes back again to what Jamie was saying. It's the meaning of the creation and the moussehair embroidery itself and the tanning of the hide that's valued in the process alone. So the mastery of these techniques and the actual process of doing them connected women, daughters, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, to the generations of women who had preceded them, and through them this learning came down. So the act of creating these objects was a connection with community identity and beliefs. And Wendat women of the community today say that as they practice this art, they are making connections and are expressing their own Wendat identity. So as I said, it goes past, it's integral, art and craft are integral, but the works themselves go past that to meanings that are based in Indigenous understandings. So in closing, I've talked about understandings of Wendat art from an Indigenous perspective and the importance of the Wendat arts in the community today, and how they integrate understandings of art and craft that go beyond the limits of these Western terms to a holistic sense of creativity that encompasses all aspects of life and spiritual meanings. Et monsieur?
Thank you very much. It's fascinating. My name's David Finkel, and I have never quite known what to call myself, to tell you the truth. I think it's just try to be myself. I suppose I was always a musician at heart. When I was in school, in grade school, which seemed like one of the last schools that ever had nuns for teachers. I thought that was a common thing. I remember talking to my friends when I was a kid. What, your teachers aren't nuns? Where do you go to school? But anyways, I used to tap on the desk all the time and then whack with the ruler. But you know what's funny is how times change, and how the things that I was once in trouble for as a child are things that I now go into classrooms and teach children to do. Take that, Sister Teresa. I win. No, anyways. So this is a different kind of a format than I'm used to speaking. I'm a jib-jabber kind of person. I'm used to talking, but you know, with the I feel like tapping the mic and saying I was never a member of the Communist Party. But okay, so I like some of these words that we have been discussing today. The word traditional. What a quandary. What does that mean? And I suppose it's up to each and every one of us to figure out what that is exactly. But for myself, traditional was you used what you had available. The person who was using black ash to make a bow to go hunting with didn't go, I'm going to opt for West Coast cedar. You know, you didn't have access to that. You used what you had. What you had is traditional. And then as the times go on and the availability of all these different materials that we work with becomes easy. I mean, I could go 10 minutes and come back and I have a pineapple for you, but pineapples don't grow here. You know, everything is so readily available to us. And so now as I see it, traditional can sometimes mean using what was used in the past as your materials. That being said, here we are. We have 1 foot in the modern world and 1 foot in the past, and at least for myself, and we're walking that line. And I like to keep things as traditional as I can with regards to how they were done. But at the same time, on my table at the powwows, my family and I, we travel around, and this is our job. This is who we are. It's not so much a hobby choice or something that we decided would be cool to do or learn about. It's just all we've got. And we have no choice but to be successful at it. Otherwise, we don't eat and we don't pay our rent. You know, I've often had folks come up to me and they say stuff like, you're selling drums for money. And it's like, well, go figure. My landlord doesn't take drums for rent. I could give you his phone number. You know, you're preaching to the converted. Phone him up and get him to take drums for rent next month. I would appreciate that if you could convince him. That being said, there's another thing that this opens up a new can of worms with regards to traditional. You know, how much stock and faith do we as a people place in the almighty dollar that we're going to let it dictate the way that we trade? When I sell a drum and it's going to be used for a ceremony or something like that, in a sense, it's like a baby chick. And it only hatches when that person hatches it. And then it looks and says, oh, you're my mommy. That's the beginning of the life for that drum. And my process in that has been just to help facilitate that along. And that's fine for me. That's all I want. If anything that gets people thinking and gets people following the traditions and inquiring into the way things were done and leads them to some type of possible spiritual fulfillment down the road, hey, you know, I was glad to play whatever small part that I could play in that. But that being said, essentially all money is a fictitious concept. But the way that I see it is a symbol of your time for my time. And here we are living in this world. We have all these things. Like I didn't come here on foot with all my things. I drove a car here. You know, I'm not sure how you guys got here. Maybe a bus, car. But this is just something that we have to mitigate. And the way that I look at my personal art and how I do things is kind of like from a Paleolithic standpoint. Ever since the caveman times where we were Paleolithic and we just took two rocks and we hit them together just because it didn't aid in our survival. It wasn't done for any specific survival purpose. Why did we do that? Perhaps that and opposable digits is the only thing that separates us from the animals. But having said that, a living must be made, and what's good is that I'm very thankful for things like this, and to go into the classrooms and to help dispel some of these mistruths that have been perpetuated by Hollywood and society and religions and all sorts of different types of things, that Native people are not the bad guys in the movie chasing after John Wayne, looking for innocent cowboys to shoot with their bows and arrows. And a lot of the time when I go into these classes and I'm working with these children, they have absolutely no concept until grade 6, which is when they begin to take Native studies. I've been lobbying and working with the school board for quite a few years to try to push that back and get them to learn those things from an earlier age. There's such value in it. And with regards to one of my favorite questions that I'm asked when I show some of my items that I make, like flutes, drums, sometimes the children and the teachers, adults, they'll say, "How long did it take you to make that?" I love that question because it always makes me think, how long did it take me to make that? Well, geez, I don't know. I suppose the animal had to be born, for the skin, but then that animal wouldn't have been there without its parents. But then the tree had to grow, but that tree came from seeds from other trees. So essentially, every question has the same answer. Every piece of art that's made has started since the beginning of time and has come to the present time to come to fruition. And that's just the way that I look at arts and crafts. Is that enough time? That's all right. Yeah.